Welcome to part 2 of the Defender for Endpoint video series. Will part 2 be as good a second film as Attack of the Clones, The Dark Knight, or Back to the Future 2? We'll find out in today's video. But before I start, just a quick introduction. My name is Jonathan Edwards, also known as the Beta 365 Guy. Now, I help businesses all over the world with their Microsoft 365. You can find more information at beta365guy.com. Now, if you've landed on today's video and you've not yet watched part 1, maybe you should do, because in today's video, we're going to continue learning more about what we implemented in part 1. We're going to continue to learn Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Business, and how to implement it in your business. Now, in part 1, we covered licensing, how to deploy Defender for Endpoint using Intune, creating next-gen antivirus policies, creating Windows firewall policies. We also covered attack surface rules and, of course, tamper protection. Okay, so let's move on to the next chunk of information in Defender for Endpoint. We're going to talk about endpoint detection, response, and auto investigation. Now, in part 1, you might remember that we used an analogy that we just bought a brand new office building and we put a security guard on the front door to stop unwanted people coming in. Now, the analogy for that security guard is he was the next-gen antivirus. We also talked about an analogy for our attack surface rules. Pretend our new office doesn't have doors, windows, or any fencing around. That's a lot of attack surfaces where people could get in. So we've got to minimize those by installing fencing, doors, and windows. This closes our attack surfaces. But what happens when we've got security guard, doors, windows, and security fencing around our business, but a bad guy still gets in? Mate, it happens. Well, we might need things inside of the building to protect against that. Maybe CCTV, maybe a smoke alarm to protect against a fire. We need some kind of alarm within that business if something slips through the net. And in Defender for Endpoint, that little something is called endpoint detection and response, along with auto investigation. Now, let's hop over to my PC and I'll show you all about it. So in the part 1 video of Defender for Business, we talked about next generation protection. We talked about attack surface reduction as well. So now we're going to talk about endpoint detection and response, and we're going to talk about auto investigation and remediation. Now, in truth, there's not a lot to configure and there's not a lot that I can show you, but I'm going to tell you about the theory. So if I just go back to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center and go into Endpoint Manager. Now, you may remember in the earlier video, in part 1, we came down to here, endpoint detection and response. And I said that this policy had been created automatically when Defender for Business was getting set up. We didn't need to create this policy. So basically, we have our default endpoint detection and response policy all set up and ready to go. So what this policy actually does, it monitors each device and it sends data on each device to the Microsoft Security Cloud. And what it's looking for is dodgy behavior. So back to our building analogy. The EDR service is a bit like CCTV or something like that, or maybe a smoke alarm. So the smoke alarm has detected that there's smoke there, okay? And an alarm has gone off. But what happens next? So EDR has set off this alarm. But obviously, we need some kind of response to that. So what happens is the EDR service actually works in contingent with the auto investigation and remediation. So if this is setting off the alarm, the smoke alarm, let's think of this as the fire service. The fire service will pick up this alarm and automatically come out and hopefully get rid of the fire. So where do you see all this happening? Well, again, go back to the 365 Admin Center, and this time we'll launch the security portal. And again, we've been in here previously, but what we can do is go to investigation and response, and we've got these incidents and alerts. So any incidents, any alerts will show in here. Now this is a test tenancy, so there's no data in here to show you. But I did hop over to a Microsoft website and I did see this one here. So this is just a screenshot, but you can see what this might look like. So more on the automated investigation and response. And this is the bit that I can't really show you much to. But what happens if the Microsoft Cloud suspects anything is dodgy, it will try and remediate that, and it will try and remediate it automatically. Now just go into this Microsoft page now, and it tells us a little bit more about automation levels. But it says here, and it's very clear here, automation investigation response in Defender for Business are pre-configured and you can't configure them. So there's nothing you can do with them. So everything, we've looked here again, full automation. Full automation is set by default in Defender for Business. So by default, Microsoft will try and remediate everything automatically for you. Now that's quite good. You don't have to configure anything. Now, when I talked in part 1 about the different licensing options, you can see here, look, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, so that's the most expensive Defender for Endpoint plan you can have, you can start playing around with these. So for different types of incidents, you can set the level of automation. But for now, and for Defender for Business, all you really need to know is the analogy, how EDR works, and how the auto investigation and remediation works, and know that it's switched on and working for your business. Next, we're going to move on to the next component. That is vulnerability management. How do you fancy another building analogy? Of course you do. Maybe you employ a security officer, and every day he walks around that building and makes recommendations.
There's a window open over there. Do you mind closing it? Has that door been left unlocked overnight? Make sure that doesn't happen again.
Well, that in Defender for Endpoint is called vulnerability management. Now, vulnerability management will continually check all our devices in our business, and it will alert us with any recommendations, how to close the vulnerabilities. Would you like to see that in Microsoft 365? Let me show you. Okay, we're back in the 365 Admin Center, and we want to go into Admin Centers and Security. Now, we've been in here throughout this video. Now, you might remember in part 1, we came down to System, we went to Settings, and we went into Endpoints and Email Notifications. And we set up some notifications for both alerts and vulnerabilities. Well, this is where we start talking about vulnerability management. And we go to Endpoints and we go to Vulnerability Management. And we've got a few options here. We'll start with a dashboard. And with every dashboard, it gives you a view of what's going on in your business. And it gives you a nice exposure score. The most interesting tab here, though, is the Recommendations one. And we've been here before when we started looking at attack surface reduction rules. But this is going to give us all of our security recommendations. So this one here, Defender has recognized that Google Chrome is out of date on 5 of 5 devices. So it's out of date on all the devices in our business. So what we could then do is we could pop into there and it's going to give us more information. We can go over and look at the exposed devices, where is Google Chrome installed, and some associated CVEs. Okay, so this is a bit of a problem for us. So how would we make sure that these devices get patched? We can see we've got a couple of options at the bottom. We can request remediation, which brings this up here. So the remediation options, well, the obvious one is to update Google Chrome. So we will choose that. If we thought, well, people shouldn't be using Google Chrome, we can actually go ahead and install the software altogether. We've got a due date, we've got a priority. So if I just stick a due date, let's go into November now. I can click on next and I can submit. And those devices should then get patched. Now you might not want to patch Google Chrome. There might be a reason for this. So we can also go on to exception options and we provide a justification as to why we're not going to update the software. So maybe third-party control, alternate mitigation, risk accepted, or maybe we're just going to remediate, but just in a few weeks' time. And so we can add an exception there. Just come out of there. Now, again, as we touched on in part 1, this will tell us about various vulnerabilities, but there's also some recommendations here in terms of attack surface reduction and some other configurations, BitLocker, so that should be done. So we can go through and we can actually make sure that our security controls have been configured correctly. And you can see what devices are impacted with this. Here is a list then of all the remediation activities. So you can see we've been patching Google Chrome before, and that's worked on 1 of 5 devices. Again, just a test tenant. We can look at our inventories, see what software is in place on the computers. We can look at a list of all our weaknesses, and we've got an event timeline. Now, if you're running a business using Microsoft 365 and using Microsoft Defender, then you should have someone nominated to be checking this every single day. You want to make sure that all your devices are kept up to date and all your security controls are configured correctly. So it's vulnerability management, which is a really underutilized product in the Microsoft 365 Defender stack. So we've talked about all these security mechanisms within Defender for Endpoint, but wouldn't it be great if Microsoft gave us a helping hand? Wouldn't it be great if one of our Windows machine suddenly became high risk and Microsoft automatically got in there and stopped access to Microsoft 365 while a technician looked at the PC? We can do all of that using compliance settings and conditional access. And I'm going to show you how. Okay, we're in the Defender portal. Let's just have a look at our assets and our devices. Now, if you look at our devices here, if we go over to the right-hand side, we see we've got a couple of different settings. We've got something called exposure level, okay? And if I hover over that, it tells me what it is. So the exposure level is taking into consideration the vulnerability management, if you remember from the previous section. So if this device has got a lot of pending security recommendations, then the exposure of this device is going to be high. Next to that, we've also got a risk level. Now, this is slightly different to the exposure level. The risk level is all about kind of activity happening on that device. So if there's any active alerts and things like that. And this risk level is what we can control, okay? So if I now hop back over to Intune and I go to Endpoint Security, in part 1 of this video, we went to Defender for Endpoint, and when we were configuring the connection between Intune and Defender, I made you make sure that this was switched on here. And this is what we need for this section. So I'll now go over to Device Compliance, and I will create a new policy. The platform is obviously Windows 10 or later. Click on Create. I'll give this a name, something like this. Click on Next. And then we get to this page here. Now, there's obviously quite a lot we can do with compliance policies. But what I'm interested in is this section here, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So what we're saying is we require the device to be at or under the machine risk score. So that is this score here. And then we've got some options. So what we're saying with this, if we choose high, is we're quite happy for the device risk score to be high risk, okay? That's not a great setting. Likewise, what we're saying here is that we need every device to be completely clear. Now, this might be going the other way a little bit. And when we start adding conditional access policies, we might get a few calls to the help desk. So this is recommended for kind of high-risk privileged machines. For lots of businesses, this setting here is a recommended, okay? But you've got to change it. You've got to test it for your own organization. Once you're happy, you click on Next. And then we get to the actions for non-compliance. So at the moment, the action is the device will be marked in Intune as non-compliant, and that will happen immediately. We can do other things like send emails and things like that, but for our purpose, this is fine. Click on Next, and then we need to assign it to a group. So again, we can create different groups here. We could have high privilege machines, and we could create a policy for that. But for the purpose of this, I will add our trusty Windows 11 devices. This might be decent for lots of organizations. We're saying that all Windows 11 devices need to be under medium or under. Okay, click on next. And there's our policy. And I will simply click on create. Now, what will happen now is Intune will simply report which devices are compliant and non-compliant. There'll be no effect on the end user. But we can tighten our security a little bit by using a conditional access policy. Now, I can access conditional access through here, Endpoint Security, and conditional access. Or I can go in through the Identity Admin Center. But see, as I'm in here, I will stay in here. And what I'll do is I will create a new policy. I'll give it a name, require device to be compliant. I will assign this to all users. Okay, you might want to play around with users here. Again, don't lock yourself out, but I'm just showing you the theory. Target resources. We're going to target all resources, which has recently changed its name from all cloud apps. And then we want to go down to these access controls here. So I'm going to go to grant. I'm going to grant access, but I need the device to be compliant. So in summary, what we've done is we've created a compliance setting that's going to mark any device which is over medium risk as non-compliant. So if we get a high-risk device, it will be marked as non-compliant. We've also said that in order to access our Microsoft 365 and Microsoft 365 data, the device has to be compliant. So any device that becomes high risk will stop getting access to 365. This is a really great policy to have. I would then click on select. It's given us a message here about macOS, Android, iOS, so I will exclude those. I'm going to exclude this current user, but I wouldn't do in normal life. Click on create, and my policy has been created. So that is how you can use compliance settings and conditional access to secure your Microsoft 365. Okay, if you followed all the advice in part 1 and part 2, we're in a great position to protect our devices. But what about when your people browse websites, maybe malicious websites? What happens when they download dodgy attachments? We need some protection. And we might want to block certain types of websites. I mean, there's some websites we don't want our users browsing to. I mean, what they do in their own spare time is up to them. But in work time, on work devices, no thank you. Well, thankfully, Defender for Endpoint has something built in. We can use SmartScreen and web content filtering, and it can help us block users browsing to dodgy websites and protect what they browse to. Would you like me to show you? Okay, so I'm in Intune. We're going to create some configuration policies. But before I do that, I just want to show you how this is going to work on a Windows 11 computer. So if I just minimize this, I've got a Windows 11 virtual machine here. I'm at the demo Microsoft site where we can test various scenarios, okay? So if I go to Microsoft Defender SmartScreen and I open this up here in a new window, now we can test what it'll look like if a user goes to a phishing site. Okay, so they're going to get something like this. Okay, what about if it's a malware page? Okay, they're going to get something like this, and then it's going to block it like this. So that is the user experience. What about a block download as well? So they'll download it, and you can see it's been blocked. Now there's an option for them to keep it, but we're going to turn that off. So that is the user experience. Now let's hop back into Intune and go to Devices and Configuration. We're going to create a new policy, and we're going to target it at Windows 10 and later, and Settings Catalog. Click on Create. We'll give it a name. Defender SmartScreen. Click on Next. We want to add settings. Okay, there's loads of settings, so let's just type in here Defender SmartScreen. Okay, and that's going to bring some up. So this top one here, we want to configure Windows Defender SmartScreen. We then want to click on here, Edge, SmartScreen settings, and we've got a few settings we want to switch on here. So this top one here, I'm going to move it over. We want to configure Defender SmartScreen to block potentially unwanted applications. We want to enable Microsoft Defender SmartScreen DNS requests. We want to force Defender SmartScreen checks on downloads from trusted sources. So we're going to prevent bypassing for sites, and we're going to prevent bypassing warnings about downloads. So I just showed you that on that computer. So that's what we want to do. Okay, I will flop that back in. These all appeared as the disabled, so we just need to enable them. Now we've got an option here, look. We can just warn people and let them bypass, or we can prevent it. I think we need to prevent it. Then go into here, switch these on. And once they're switched on, click on next again. Assignments, again, you can target all devices. I will be using our trusty group there. Click on next and click on create. Click on refresh, and we've got our first policy. Now, we can take this further with another policy because there's something called Enhanced Phishing Protection in SmartScreen. So this is quite new, and it applies to just Windows 11 version 22H2 and later computers. But what it does, it helps protect your Microsoft 365 passwords. And there's a few scenarios where it can help. So firstly, if a user types or pastes their Microsoft 365 password in a browser, in a website that's deemed malicious by Microsoft, then Enhanced Phishing Protection will tell them. It's another bit of excellent security. Now, to turn this on, again, we need to, go back into Intune, create a new policy, target Windows 10 and later, profile type, settings catalog again, click on create, give it a name, something like that. I'll put something in the description. There you go. So if you're using Windows 10 at the moment, excellent opportunity to upgrade. Click on next, back into the settings catalog. At the top, type Enhanced Phishing Protection. Here we go. Microsoft recommends that we turn all these on. Get all those. Enable the service. Notifications. Click on next. Again, the same kind of thing. We will add the groups, add our Windows 11 group. Click on next. Click on create. So we've now got those configuration profiles in configuration policies in place. Now, what about web content filtering? Back to Defender. Okay, so this is the Defender page here. What we want to do is go down to settings, endpoints. On the advanced features tab, we would like to scroll down and make sure that web content filtering is switched on. And if it is, we'll go to rules, web content filtering. Let's add a policy. Give it a name. Okay, click on next. And then we can block all these categories. Okay, so this is all we can do, but it's worth having. So we can block all adult content, any of these, absolutely these. And then we've got some sections here. So be wary. If you're using the new Outlook in your business and you block this, it'll stop it working. Now, I'm going to block social networking just for my little demo I'm going to show you in a moment. Plus, these are worth having. Park domains, newly registered domains. A lot of cyber criminals use newly registered domains, so these will be blocked. And also park domains with no content or anything like that. Well worth switching on. Click on next, apply it to our machine groups, and that is our new policy. So how does this look like, okay? Let me wait a few minutes, and then I will move over to my demo PC. Okay, so we've got our Windows 11 PC. We've just configured the web content filtering. I'm a member of the team. I open Edge. I want to browse to Facebook, and I can't, okay? And there's no options for me to get there. It's simply blocked by my organization. So this might be really handy for your business. Okay, that is it for part 2 of Defender for Endpoint. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I look forward to seeing you again soon.